I'm Jeremy Simon. I'm Director of Strategic Planning at Ayzenberg. I spent the last kind of 15 years or so of my career obsessing about brands and about the relationship between brands and their audiences. And to obsess about a brand is really to obsess about trust, because that's what we're building between a brand. Every time you communicate between a brand and an audience, you're trying to build trust. So today, the topic of this talk is trust. I'm aware that I'm the only thing between you and lunch, so we'll keep this fairly snappy. I'm really excited to share something that Chris mentioned at the start of the day, which is our latest addition to what we call our tools of influence. These tools are a holistic line of platforms, products, and services that help brands achieve their marketing goals by turning data into influence. So it's a relationship between listening and the data into how we then create and share to affect influence. So last year at the summit, we introduced the Ayzenberg Earned Media Value Index, which has changed the way the industry thinks about how we measure and evaluate social and digital endorsement. There it is on the right, surrounded by red. This year, we've developed a tool which we are confident will become another industry standard. It's a collaboration between Ayzenberg's strategy, insight, and AI groups. And it represents our combined expertise in social listening, data science, and brand theory. So I'm here alone, but I represent a large team of people, some of whom are here today. So we've called today's presentation Trust Matters, and the reason for that is because it does. It matters to you guys, it matters to your business. Whether you're a startup or a market leader, whether your category is emerging or if it's maturing, trust is incredibly important. I'm here to tell you why it matters and what you can do about it, how it can be measured, and how it can be influenced. We are living through an era of great disruption. That won't come as news to anyone in this room. Driven by digital technology, industries and institutions are being upended and they're being rethought. Thinking different has become the new normal. So for all the many benefits of this, one side effect is that we also live in an age of great uncertainty. What was seen as a somewhat stable ground of 20th century economies has given way to something far less predictable. For better and for worse. Mostly good, but there is a bit of a downside. In an era of information overload, it's become harder to know who and what to trust, whether that be politicians, news sources, but also brands. It's harder for consumers to decide and make that choice. But at the same time, something else has happened in the importance of trust as a key brand metric has actually risen. It's become more and more important. In fact, there's empirical evidence that trust in a brand is intrinsically linked to brand loyalty. Direct relationship to how much someone trusts your brand and how loyal someone is to your brand. And therefore, clearly, what the value of your brand is. Put simply, the more trust a customer has in your brand, the more lifetime value that customer represents to you. And if people actively distrust your brand, on the other hand, it can have a disproportionate negative impact on your brand's reputation and value. So despite its increasing importance, there doesn't seem to be an agreed upon standard definition of trust in the marketing and business community. And there certainly isn't a kind of standardized way to measure it. So we want to change that. And that's why we're so excited to announce what we believe is the most rigorous and objectively quantifiable measure for brand trust, which we call the Ayzenberg Brand Trust Index. Led by a team of world-class data scientists and brand thinkers, we've drawn on psychometric theory, as well as deep language processing and primary quantitative research to arrive at the most robust and arguably valid measure of trust ever created. And it's one that we believe will become a new industry standard. So our first task was to understand what brand trust is. How do we define that? What are its components? The relationship between a brand and a customer is incredibly nuanced. It's incredibly fluid, and it's very subtle. And yet currently the standard measurement of brand trust is a survey that asks, how much do you trust this brand? 5-point scale. It's way too general, way too broad. The reality is much more complex. Trust is a system of values and attributes. Some are stable and some are much more transient. So given that trust isn't an absolute measure, we first needed to understand the component sub-dimensions of trust. So if trust isn't absolute, what is? What are the most granular measures we can break it down into to measure? And then we develop each of these measures to determine if they meet rigorous criteria for reliability and validity, so we can be sure that we're right. So academic research suggests, and our own studies verify, that there are 3 major components of brand trust. The first is trust itself. That's the kind of core value. The second is emotional appeal, and the third is loyalty. So those are the kind of mega dimensions of trust, the 3 pillars on which we're building our model. So I'll go through each of those in turn. I hope you're all ready for some psychometric theory. This is where it gets fun. So trust is defined as the willingness of the average consumer to rely on the ability of the brand to perform its stated function. In other words, trust, in this context, is a relationship between expectation, as set forth by a brand, and the reality of a consumer's experience with that brand. Through extensive research on current formulations of trust, we determined that the measurable qualities of trust, so again, the smallest unit we can measure, is credibility, competence, innovativeness, and similarity. So if you're doing well on all 4 of those, you're building trust. Secondly, emotional appeal, which we define as a brand's potential to elicit a positive emotional response in the average consumer as a result of its use or through sensory exposure to aspects of the brand. So quite simply, how close someone feels to a brand. The dimensions of that are idealism, aspiration, vision, gratitude, quality, excitement, and engagement. And finally, loyalty. We define loyalty as a desire to be affiliated with a brand through repeated business engagement and by expressing a positive brand view to others. So it's not just purchase, it's advocacy. So again, based on review of the literature, we've determined the measurable qualities are personality, reciprocity, values, competitiveness, and stubbornness. That's what makes up loyalty. So in order to determine the relative strength of a brand's overall trust, we need to quantify each of these 16 subdimensions. And we do that using deep language analytic tools. So we are listening. We're understanding and interpreting the language that people are using around the brand and the language that the brand itself is using. And we use tools such as IBM's Watson, as well as our own proprietary hexacode-based model. So just a quick aside, while we were confident we'd arrived at an exceptionally robust understanding of trust, we also knew that an individual's personal characteristics can affect their ability to trust. We're human, we're not all the same, we don't all trust on the same level, so we had to normalize that. We normalized it against these measures here. So it's risk tolerance, it's positive emotionality, it's lack of perceived power, it's gullibility and its associated naivety and over-optimism, it's secure attachment, self-confidence, and emotional intelligence. So we all fit somewhere on those scales, and we need to understand where in order to be able to accurately measure your trust. So how do we envision using the trust index? How do we want you guys to be able to use it? Well, fully understanding the relative strength of your individual trust dimensions will allow brand managers to isolate and improve specific problem areas that need to be worked on in a way that will drive trust, loyalty, and ultimately value. So for example, if a brand's high on innovation but low on competence, the strategy would be different than a brand scored in the other direction. And there are specific tactics, which I don't have time to go into today, but there are tactics and strategies to shore up each of these individual measures through forms of marketing communication. Brand trust is a value metric for both emerging markets and established ones. And this is the relevance, I think, for a category like competitive gaming, like eSports. I think it's almost more important for an industry like competitive gaming, which is so fast developing. There's a danger of getting ahead of the audience, of not having that kind of that heritage and that foundation of trust. So it needs to be created. Brands involved in the category will need to rely on smart marketing strategies to efficiently build trust as they scale. Knowing how your brand's trust indexes against other brands in the category, and even against others beyond the category, is the first step in engaging and growing your customer base. So that's what I wanted to say to you today. That's our introduction. We're super excited about the Brand Trust Index. We've already started populating it with data and measuring it, and measuring brands across categories. We'll be rolling the product out over coming weeks. There'll be information available on our website. Please do get in touch if you have any questions about it. If you want to be updated with more information, we really look forward to working with you collaboratively on it. I'll be around afterwards. Please talk to myself or any one of my colleagues. We will, to a greater or lesser extent, be able to explain psychometric theory. But please drop me a line if you have any questions. Thank you very much.